What's up guys, Gemma here and back again for another gaming content related video. Everything's gaming related, and today I'm going to be talking about the Resident Evil 2 Remake versus Resident Evil 7. Capcom have been busy at work over the last couple of years, and boy have they given us fantastic experiences with the Resident Evil 2 remake, and then a couple of years ago with Resident Evil 7. Now if you're like me, you like your horror, so sit tight and just know that this video is coming from my own thoughts. You may have very different opinions and that is fine, but make sure you thump that subscribe button. We're close to 30k, so if you want to help me out and you enjoy gaming content that is consistent, please thump that sub button and hit that like button, and let's get into it. Okay, so I feel like I have to set my stall up fully before we dive into this. Now, if you've watched my streams, you would have seen me complete Resident Evil 3 times. That's once on every difficulty. So we did this first on standard, then on hardcore, and then on easy with Resident Evil 7. Now, of late, we've had a blitz through the Leon campaign, full to completion, and then with the Claire B campaign I went through with the alternative costume, fully completed on stream. Now clearly there's a 19-year age gap between these two video games, and I think for me the main differences come within that age. I mean, this is clearly a remake, so it's been quite difficult for Capcom, I guess, to deviate from the original Resident Evil 2 content. Ultimately, there was more creative freedom, I think, with Resident Evil 7. Now, this took a massively different turn to what we're used to in terms of the level of horror. The Resident Evil 7 game, or rather Biohazard as it's known in Japan, centered around the Baker's mansion. Initially, I was super excited to know that we were venturing back into a mansion, but there was an absolute lack of zombies. We always know and we always expect lots of zombies within any Resident Evil game, and I think a lot of people before they'd played it had questioned whether or not it would work. Now I think we can say that it's worked pretty darn well in both VR and Resident Evil 7 without VR, which is the way I prefer to play it. But nonetheless, it took a lot of getting used to. It took a lot for me to kind of settle down into the differences as I was so accustomed to the kind of the undead shuffling of zombies within previous Resident Evil games. So why did I mention that? Well, I mentioned that because I think that's an important part of what I'm about to say. Resident Evil 2 was packed full of nostalgia. You know, there are certain things you do, you go into, I mean, there are differences within Raccoon Police Department, for example, like on the PlayStation 1 version, you couldn't get straight up the stairs, whereas in this version, in the remake version, you could quite easily get to the first and second floor with the steps without pissing about too much. And it was just nice to see like the cutscene where you start in Leon's campaign, and then there's this noise outside in the very early hours of the gameplay, and Claire bursts through the door, and he's like, get down, bang, and then takes out the zombie. And you know, little clips like that. I think for me this game packs a serious nostalgia punch. Now let's talk about horror between the two games. I found very different levels of horror, and this is what I've been trying to kind of wrap my head around. Now initially I wanted zombies in Resident Evil 7, but I soon became accustomed to the depraved level of horror that the Bakers gave us. Like Jack is like, when you kill Jack in the garage in that first instance, you think, oh, it's done, it's gone, it's, you know, and then Jack comes back, and then you kill him again, and then he comes back again, and you know, mutated Jack, and it's just like, it just, I don't know, it just, for me, it's like there's more of a resonance with the horror in Resident Evil 7. You know, you think you've gotten somewhere with it, and then, oh no, it's kind of back, but 10 times stronger, then you kill that, and so on and so forth. And I think Jack is one of the better written characters, if I'm brutally honest. I actually thought it would centre more around Marge Baker, but no, I think Jack is quite pivotal in delivering a lot of the horror within Resident Evil 7. Now, in terms of like jump scares, I think this is a difficult one. Which game provides more jump scares? Let me put this down. Let me just tell you a little bit of something what I found with Resident Evil 2 between the Leon and the Claire campaigns, and then we'll come back to that. With the Leon playthrough in the Resident Evil 2 remake, I found that the jump scares were quite moderate. There were some frightening times in the early stages within the Raccoon City Police Department rather. And then after that, when you go into the sewers, the garage, the kind of jump scares wore off, and I found the game to be a hell of a lot more linear. With the Claire campaign, which I've now completed in Resident Evil 2, personally, I found there to be much more of a challenge in terms of the amount of zombies seemed to be increased, the amount of jump scares seemed to increase, the level of ammunition seemed to drop significantly, which clearly provided a mammoth level of challenge when you're trying to navigate through like a gauntlet of 3 zombies with 1 bullet, and then you shoot that bullet and you miss, in my case, because I have a crap aim. So I think like it was I liked that it was uneven in Resident Evil 2 between Leon and Claire. The level of horror seemed much more increased with the Claire campaign compared to Leon, and I found it to be a little bit more challenging purely because the level of ammunition had dropped. And I just want to make this clear that I played through them both on standard, so medium difficulty. I haven't touched easy, haven't touched the hardcore mode in Resident Evil 2 remake yet, and I think I'm just going to kind of step away from it for a little bit. But let me know what you found, because I said it a lot in my stream that I just found it so different, and I didn't, to be honest, expect it to be that different between the 2 campaigns. Like, I don't remember that, so I guess it wasn't as much of a nostalgia punch, because I kind of just, you know, the areas were, some of the cutscenes were, but the differences I found between the 2 characters startled me quite a bit. So in addition to the differences and the different levels of horror between the 2 characters, I didn't find this as linear as I found Resident Evil 7. For example, I found you're in like Raccoon City Police Department, and there's a hell of a lot of going round and round the same area. There's a lot of meaningful backtracking. I like that term in the gaming world, meaningful backtracking. I found that with Resi 2, you would have to go back, pick an item up, and then go back for another key, come back. And I really enjoyed that because it made me feel a bit more claustrophobic, but I appreciated the area a little bit more. I don't think that Resident Evil 2 is a big game in terms of its geography. You know, there's very few places that you actually venture to. But the level of detail, I think, like, I enjoyed looking at different items on the desk and, you know, backtracking and then say, oh, I didn't notice that before. And then a zombie had come out. So I just think, like, for a game that backtracks so much, there's a lot of variation, and I really enjoyed that. Whereas Resident Evil 7, I found that, like, if you think of that path, you know, where you go, where you venture to in the different areas within Resident Evil 7, this for me is a much bigger game, and it took me a much longer time to complete. The completion time for me for Leon was 7 hours 54. With Claire, it was like 6 hours and something. For this, I think I actually spent 5 hours on the Marge, like, spider boss, which was insane. That was on the hardcore mode. So I think this is a much more linear game. Not so much backtracking. And I think on standard mode, it is a lot more difficult. That's just my take on the 2 games. It's kind of weird, but if I had never played a Resident Evil game, I think out of these 2 games, the Resident Evil 2 remake would be a better game to introduce you to the series compared with Resident Evil 7. Call me crazy, I don't know why that is. I think it's just because this game, like Resident Evil 2, you're encouraged to explore a little bit more because of the backtracking. Whereas this, you just encouraged, like for me, it was just, you just go to line. There's, you know, it's kind of weird. I hated this in VR, by the way. It was great initially, but it made me feel really sick. Ooh, massive kudos to anybody that can play it through in VR. It's definitely not one for me. But yeah, I really enjoyed both games, and I've heard rumours that Capcom have Resident Evil 8 in early development, so I think that there's a lot to come. There's a lot of goodness to follow within this Resident Evil franchise. Now, I think the big question for me is this. Would I like to see more zombie horror within a Resident Evil franchise? Or would I like to see the kind of psychological weirdness that the Bakers added in Resident Evil 7? Now, that's clearly not an academic term, but I think you know what I mean, and I'm hoping you know what I mean. For me personally, I'd like to see a shift back more towards the zombies. I would like to see more open areas, for example, like being out on the street a lot more rather than being trapped in sewers or a mansion. Who knows? We'll see what we get. It's very difficult to predict because I think the Resident Evil franchises have taken multiple turns, some for the better, some not for the better. But for me, the series as a whole has been relatively consistent in that the games look fantastic, the replay value is very high, and it's just something that we've all grown up with for like the past 21 years. And for that, I'm really grateful to Capcom. So guys, they're just my thoughts really, just my thoughts on playing through Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 7 over the last couple of years. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Like I said, if you like consistent gaming content, if you like giveaways, then make sure you thump that subscribe button and leave a like. I've made some changes to the shelving areas within this lady lounge. I've actually freed up a ton of space. So when I feel ready, we'll do an updated game room tour. But for now, I will catch you in Wednesday's video. Have a beautiful day. My name is Gemma. Take care. See you soon.